food has always been about community, and we've always been about the communal table. Even if you think of the way we prepare food, from like laf wara al-inab to making kubbe, this is a group activity. It was never meant for an individual. You know, I hate that we have to call the manouche a flatbread. Like, a manouche is a manouche. Like, no one calls a tortilla like a flat corn pancake. Like, it's just, like, why do we feel the need to rename our stuff?
Thank you so much. I'm thrilled to be here hosting 2 live episodes of the Afikra Matbakh podcast in collaboration with What the Food at alserkal. In both episodes, we'll be exploring the evolving culinary scene in the Arab world with 2 thought leaders in the UAE, 2 amazing thought leaders, Leen Al Zaben and Ziad Ayas, who will be here tomorrow. We're going to learn how the culinary scene is being redefined through community building, culinary storytelling, and entrepreneurship in the region. Please follow the Matbakh podcast everywhere podcasts are on YouTube, Spotify, Apple Podcasts, wherever you get yours. And be sure to follow Afikra while you're at it. My name is Vanessa Zuabi, and I'll be your guest host today. I'm a former founder and entrepreneur in the food and health space. I currently work in crypto, and I've been an Afikra nerd for many, many years. So today, I'm really excited to welcome Leen Al Zaben. We're going to be exploring the importance of building real Arab culinary community. Leen creates meaningful experiences around food and culture. With over a decade of consulting, work in consulting in food and beverage and hospitality, she's worked on many diverse projects, developed cookbooks, created food and travel content, and advised on culinary innovations in Amman, Dubai, San Francisco, and Tokyo. Leen believes in the power of food to tell stories and foster cultural exchange, bringing people together and creating lasting memories. Through all her projects, she's collaborated with chefs, journalists, culinary advocates to celebrate flavors and traditions worldwide. She recently launched Wasat, a platform for meaningful conversations, culinary conversations around food, and she's one of the lead organizers of the Jordan International Food Festival. Leen, I'm so happy to have you and to be on the stage with you. Let's just kick off just with what inspired you and to focus on the nexus between food, culture, and community in the Arab world.
First of all, thank you for having me here. I got into food by chance. It wasn't something I had planned. It was a passion, it was a hobby, and this was about 12 years ago, even more, I think 15 now. And what was a summer project, which was a food blog, turned into like a full-blown career. And had I planned for it, I don't think it would have turned out the way that it had. And I guess because we're talking about community, I think I chose food because I was writing at the time and I was working on journalism education and consulting there. Writing was just a hobby for me, and I started a food blog because I got into a writing program and I had the summer off. And so I could have written about fashion or the environment or food, and I was writing about those things at the time as a freelancer. And I don't know why food was the one thing that seemed like it connected people and that it was relevant to people from all walks of life. And I wanted that connection. And I wanted my work to always kind of resonate with people from all over. And so I started writing about food, and it was just a summer hobby. And then it just kind of took on a life of its own. So that's how I got started. So in all of your experiences, I mean, you've done cookbooks, you've consulted on food and beverage food innovation. Can you give us an example of one that has really been at the forefront of building culinary communities? I mean, I'm going to start with the most recent stuff because I've done a lot of work in the past. But for me, something that was really pivotal was the Jordan Food Festival that happened this summer. And I saw Sarah somewhere here around, but I was one of the people who helped organize and bring it to life. And I think in that moment, it was an opportunity for us to focus on regional talent. And I think in the past year, a lot of us have kind of come to this realization that we've relied on the West to tell our story, and we've been waiting for someone else to tell our story. And it was very important to kind of shed light on people, communities, women working in the villages, to kind of tell our story, but also document our culinary traditions, because that's something that's also kind of getting lost.
Yeah.
So for me, that was an opportunity to kind of bring all these things together and tell that story from our perspective, because sometimes our stories are also told by others, but it's time for us to kind of take control of the narrative and tell our own stories.
Yeah, and given everything, I mean, it's hard to begin one of these discussions and to talk about our culture and society without, mentioning everything that's happening in the region today. I'm curious, over the last year with Gaza and now Lebanon, how this is now shaping your work that you're doing around community building, culinary community building.
This is a big question, because I think this is something...
I like to ask easy questions.
No, but this is the stuff that we're all struggling with. I think for me, I feel like I'm living this dual life where I'm so impacted by what's happening, but also I live here, I'm with my kids, I'm working, I'm creating, I'm kind of removed from the reality of the people that are also like close to me in terms of culture, but also people we know. So how do we bridge that gap, and how do we focus on creating something that's meaningful, that also tells our story? Because I feel like we've been vilified, we've been, like, the media is controlling the narrative, and so how do we kind of take that back, but also show the beautiful things about food and community? I was recently reading an essay by a writer called Nick Gill, and he was talking about food being a source of nourishment, but also a source of love. And when you work in food, it has to come from that place. And so this is what it kind of was an aha moment for me, because all of us are working in food, all of us are telling stories, whether we're cooking or writing or sharing an experience, and it has to come from that place. Yeah. And I think we just need to focus on that, and to focus on telling our story and remember where that comes from, because that's the essence of it. Yeah. And I think that's why we all work in food and in hospitality and taking care of others and sharing a meal with someone.
Mm-hmm. I mean, so much of food brings us back to our family history and our, spending time with our family. I'm curious how, and we've had this discussion before, but I'm curious how today you've been able to bring people back to their traditions, right? So much of food has been lost over the course of the years. We've talked about like the impact of globalization and how this took us away from where, our roots in terms of where our food comes from. I'm curious how you've worked on this, kind of bringing us back to our tradition, our roots through food, through your work.
I think it has to be, and I thought about that since our last conversation, about food and community, and I think in every part of the world, but I can speak for the Arab world and in the culture that I grew up in, food has always been about community, and we've always been about the communal table. Even if you think of the way we prepare food, from like laf wara al-inab to making kubbe, this is a group activity. It was never meant for an individual. And we talked about how, and I can speak for myself, I feel like we're on the cusp of, like, in Europe and in the 60s, everyone moved on to the Industrial Revolution, and they were kind of prepared to kind of, do the fast food, packaged foods sort of thing. And we're still, till today, but we're right on the edge of like tipping over. We're still into like family meals, home-cooked food, honoring the seasons. But we also see a lot of the fast food. So we're kind of in between. And whereas the West has kind of gone back to farm-to-table foraging, and they're all like these movements. For us, they're still a part of our daily life. Like in spring, you see khubbeze on the side of the road in Jordan, and you stop and you forage some akoub. These traditions still exist, but they're also getting lost because not many people are familiar with the seasonality of things or the way things are done, or how many people know how to like wrap vine leaves. It's not something that we're still doing, but it's still like there on the surface. How do we bring that back? And because our culture, our Arab culture, is about community, I think we just need to kind of think of what's natural for us and kind of go back to that, as opposed to trying to adopt the farm to table movement or the foraging movement. Just think about how you grew up, how your parents grew up, and kind of tap into that history and see how you can integrate that into your life. And that's how I think of it.
You've been one of the main organizers of the Jordan Food Festival. I'm curious how food festivals as well have played into this, bringing people back to their roots in terms of food and building community around food.
I think these events are amazing for people who work in hospitality, especially people who work in restaurants, because they barely have the time to connect. Like, I feel like you connect with your guests, with your team, but rarely, because it's a hospitality job and because you're always on, you rarely have these moments to connect with others who are doing the same thing in parallel. And so I find that these events are a great opportunity for people to kind of be off work and connect over their struggles or their dreams or their passions. And I saw that in Jordan, because what happened was we had these like collaboration dinners, and we had these chefs cooking on the first night, but then they showed up every night and helped everyone cook again, and again. And so to see that kind of sense of camaraderie, to see that, because they all like want to work with each other, they all want to learn from one another. So we had that component. And then we had the other component of just having people discover people that they hadn't met before, or whose work they hadn't been exposed to, or to like a traditional way of making bread that they hadn't come across before. So this all is part of connecting people. And it's the power of food, it's the power of cooking. We all love to eat, we all have to eat, but it's something that everyone can understand and connect with.
Yeah, I want to touch on two things that you've mentioned. One is sort of this mentorship piece, or connecting chefs. And then the second thing is telling our own story and communicating our own identity. I'm curious how you've done this globally in terms of international chefs connecting with Arab chefs and being able to share their work and learn from each other.
I think I have so many questions here, but I think the culinary scene in the Middle East is quite young. Like it's still growing, and I feel like a part of it has been cultural. I remember I was telling you how when I 10 years ago told my dad I was going to get into food, he was like, why? Like you studied writing, like why are you going to go into food? And he didn't understand it at the time, because it wasn't a career that was like chosen. It wasn't like a doctor or a lawyer. And I feel like a lot of us who are into food now had to like maybe convince people that it was the right path. And I think because it's quite young, a lot of us had to seek mentorship from the outside. I remember one of my first mentors was Anisa Helou and Kamal Mzawa, and they were one of the only two people working in food in that space at the time. And I remember like emailing them, and they responded, and I had like the best advice from them. But now you have more and more people who are in food, who have experience. And how do we kind of connect the new generation with people who have been doing this for a decade or even more so? So it's kind of growing, but these festivals, these events are an opportunity for people to connect with one another and kind of discover chefs, and it doesn't have to be an Arab chef, it could be any chef. But once you're in that platform, once we have people coming in and learning about our culture and our people and the way we work, and then there's like that room for cultural exchange.
Mm-hmm. And have you seen, what have been the reactions of international chefs to meeting Arab chefs, learning about our culinary traditions and our culture? I'm curious if you've had any particular engagement.
There was this one story. There was a group of Italians, they were journalists, and they came to Amman, and I don't know what they were expecting, but they lost their minds, because they were like, oh my God, like you have 4 seasons. Oh, you have like nature, you have access to ingredients. And they were just wowed by everything. And it seemed very strange to me that they would be so surprised that this exists. It was as if I don't know, it was just very surprising to me. And then they're like, oh, we're very similar. And I'm like,
it's like, yeah, we're basically the same.
Yeah, we are similar. Like, why are you so surprised? And so for me, that was like this aha moment where they haven't been exposed to this. And so how can we tell our story?
Yeah.
How can we showcase our talent, our ingredients, our region, in a way that doesn't have to be, because I feel like we've always had to kind of morph ourselves into a version that would like appeal to other tastes. But I think we need to be ourselves, and now we are. I feel like, again, this past year, we're all just like really being our true selves, or trying to, without having to kind of, I hate that we have to call the manouche a flatbread. Like a manouche is a manouche. Like no one calls a tortilla like a flat corn pancake. Like it's just, like why do we feel the need to rename our stuff, and we still do it. Like I was having a conversation with a friend who was working on a cookbook, and she's like, how do we describe atayef? I'm like, we don't have to.
Yeah.
Why do we have to describe atayef? Like atayef are atayef, and it is what it is.
Figure it out.
Yeah.
I want to get into, I have a lot of questions still for you, but before we get, I want you to sort of talk to us about Wasat and the kind of meaningful conversations that you're generating around food through Wasat and what its purpose is and why now is such an important time for this to be launching.
It kind of, I don't know, it's something that I've been thinking about for a while, and I have to say that working on the festival this summer was a great professional moment for me, because all the doubts that I had about myself and my work kind of disappeared, because I was like, oh, I can do this. And so it gave me a lot of confidence to kind of work on the things that have always been on like the back burner, but I was too scared to do. Or it's like having a birthday party as a child and no one showing up. Like that's the sort of feeling, like even for this talk, even for the festival, like are people gonna come? And so with Wasat, I was like, if I do these talks, will people sign up? Like it's just this fear, like will I have 5 people or 50 people? But then I just decided to kind of get over it and do it, because if I don't do it, it's just never going to come to life. And this was inspired by, okay, like it's our time to tell our own story. I don't know what it's going to look like in 5 years, but for now, I find myself in the middle of 2 communities, and I want to connect. Like I have a network, and this is what I have from my years of working, and different people have like different areas of expertise, and there's so much knowledge to share, and there's an opportunity to connect so many different people. And so I want to start this talk series, and then maybe, I don't know, work on films or publish cookbooks. I don't know what it's going to look like, and I actually don't want to think about it. I want it to be organic and see kind of what format it takes. But for me, Wasat it means central. It's also related to where my family's from in Jordan, and we're from Al Wasat, so it's kind of central. I see it as being this like center of conversations, of activities, of events, of anything really that's related to food and culture, because they're so interconnected.
Yeah, and this is launching this year,
yeah, we have our first event on the 29th.
Amazing. Maybe we can share details about it later. So, I mean, another thing, in terms of cultural advocacy, can you talk to us a little bit about the work that you've done around promoting Arab culture, food in other venues as well, and through some of your other projects?
I feel like we're all ambassadors of the Arab world. I happen to be in a position where I meet a lot of chefs from all over. And for me, it's not just representing Jordan, it's representing the Middle East, it's representing the UAE, it's representing where I live, where I'm from, and the chefs that are connected to that, and the ecosystem that's connected to that. So how can we make introductions? How can we kind of promote this? Through my work with 50 Best or through the Jordan Food Festival. It's about like having that platform for connection, and one thing leads to the other. But I don't think I would have gotten these opportunities had we not like kind of been out there. And I have to say I'm very fortunate. I also lived in San Francisco, and that's where I really built my network, because I was working at a startup. We were well funded. I had access to resources, to people. We were building an intelligent oven, but I was looking after the food aspect of things, but also the storytelling aspect of things. So if I wanted to work with a creative agency, then I had access to that. If I wanted to work with a PR agency, I had access to that. And that kind of gave me the network, but also gave me the confidence to kind of also, being Arab in the US, but also working for a brand. Like it was just like kind of breaking down these stereotypes, because they're like, oh, you're Jordanian, oh, you're Arab, like you look like that, you speak like that. I hate it when they say, oh, you speak English so well. And it's like, we all get it. Like I don't know if it's offensive or not, but it's just really funny.
Well, and I think it's interesting as an Arab that food has always been kind of the one area that people connected to our culture with, even in the United States. I mean, it's blasphemous, but how they've taken hummus and turned it into their own version of it. But in a way, it's like a compliment because they, I don't know, maybe I'm saying something.
No, it is, but it's like a pet peeve because hummus is chickpea and they're like avocado hummus, or like red, and I'm like,
Pumpkin
no, it's
spice
not. It's
hummus.
like avocado is avocado, but it's also going back to this ownership of the manouche. Like hummus is hummus, a manouche is a manouche. This is not hummus. This is maybe some version of guacamole. Like, let's just call it what it is. It's not hummus. It's
One last question before we open up to questions, I think, for a little bit. But, you work with a lot of chefs and culinary experts. I'm curious what you would recommend to those of us that are amateurs in this space about how we can integrate our food, culture, and community into our lives a little bit more to connect with each other and to connect with other cultures globally, I guess.
I think this is a very good question because this has been something that's been on my mind. I recently in January, was in Peru on a trip. It was more of it wasn't really about the food, it was about the people. And I think I basically spent the day hiking in the Andes with these women who were herding sheep, and we were spinning like wool into yarn. And then we had walked for maybe 4 or 5 hours, and then we ended like the walk on a cliffside where we had a picnic that was super simple. It was boiled corn, roasted potatoes, and then we all sat in a circle, and they had each brought a salad from home, and that was passed around. And what struck me was these were indigenous to the Andes, and my family is Bedouin from Jordan. But I feel like I've taken so many steps back to disconnect from who I am and where I come from, whereas these women were so much themselves in their element. And I felt, I want to say jealous or envious of the fact that they were so truly themselves and so proud of who they were and what they eat. And they didn't have to be another version of themselves for me. And I find myself in Jordan doing that. And we've done that. We want to fit the Western image of, we want to be accepted. We want to be seen as an equal. And so that struck me. So I think and this is advice for myself, is to just kind of connect as much as I can to who I am and where I come from, and not try to filter that or turn it into some version of who I need to be to please someone else, and just really own my food, my culture. Like people say mensaf, and it's like, I'm like, yeah, it's a mound. It's kind of like, I wish we were able to like do it in a more like sophisticated way, but no, it is what it is, and let's accept it and just move on. I don't know if
that's great.
That answers your question, but it's just
that's a great answer. Well, thank you, Leen, for answering my questions. I could keep going, but we have a few minutes, so if anyone has any specific questions for Leen, we're open the last maybe 7 minutes we have.
Thank you for the content. Leen, you mentioned some food or dishes that probably our generation know, but 2 generations from today, maybe they will never even hear of them, whether it was akub or any other dish from our culture. Now, how do you attempt in your own work to pass on our own food culture into our generations? You said that we are on the tip of moving to the West and we're staying here, but how do you make sure, let's say, besides being ambassador to everybody else, how do you attempt to pass on that to the current generations?
I think the first place to start is to document and to ask the questions and have the conversations and sit with the grandmas and the moms and whoever still has that knowledge, because it hasn't been passed down. So I'm a mother of 2 girls, and my responsibility is to teach them that. But to the rest, it's about telling the stories. It's about documenting. It's about I wanted to invite people over for Wada Aina the other day, and I was like, oh, you know what? We should do it together. Like, we should have it prepared, but then we should sit around the table and roll it together, because it's the action. It's doing that. We do workshops on photography, and even at alserkal now, we have like a bunch of things going on. Why isn't there something on kubbe or wara anab or making sakhan? I don't know. It's about kind of engaging with our recipes and our heritage and doing that. And yeah, we think it's common knowledge, but a lot of people don't know how to make these things and don't know where to start. And it's scary because Arabic food is like labor intensive. So
Hi.
Hi.
I just wanted to know more about the Wasat.
Yeah.
Are they going to be held here in Dubai?
yes, so it's going to be held here in Dubai. My first, let's say, series is in collaboration with the Lighthouse, so it's going to be taking place at their new location in D3. And we have 3 different tracks. So the first track is entrepreneurship in food, and the first talk is about fundraising in F&B. And that was inspired by a friend who's into food and had an investor but didn't know how to structure her deal, what to ask for. And then I realized that there were so many chefs who had investors but who had bad deals and who were super famous but weren't making any money because they didn't know how to structure their deal. And so the first talk is we have 3 people in finance who have invested in F&B or who work in fundraising to kind of answer questions and talk about how to structure these deals, what to ask for. And there's a lot of fear as well. Like when you have an investor, you're like, oh, I'll give you 60% of my company just because they're there, but you actually don't know what you're signing away. And so it's a good way to kind of bring awareness. So that's the entrepreneurship track. There's another one on creativity, so like how to write a proposal for a cookbook, how to pitch a TV series in foods. And then the third track is more in terms of like a wine pairing thing, like more technical skills. So that's the first thing.
Sounds good. Thank you.
Hi, Leen. You don't want to do it? Okay. What's your favorite childhood memory that's around food?
Oh my God, I think the first one just came to mind is the carts of dura and turmos in Amman. Like I love those and I love the way they smelled, and we'd go to the park and you just smell them, and so we'd buy, but my mom would make us boil them at home because she was like, we need to make sure we clean them properly. But like that's the first street food memory I have, yeah.
Hi.
Hi.
You said that you studied writing.
Well, that was, oh, yeah.
How did you do the switch? Like, at what point did you think, okay, this is not what I'm going to do, and I'm going to pursue food? Before you had that chat with your dad?
It was in parallel, actually, because I had my blog and I was writing, and because it was a writing program, we had 2 weeks of classes and then 6 weeks off, and so I had time off. And because I had the blog, and I think there are like maybe 5 other people in the Middle East blogging about food, so when you Googled food writer, food photographer, I would pop up. And so I started getting emails like, oh, will you do like this shoot for us, or will you develop a recipe for us? And I remember I did the first few projects for free, and then Zafir, here, my husband, who was my boyfriend at the time, he's like the business-minded person. He sat me down and he had a napkin and he's like, okay, this is your day rate. This is what you asked for. Like, you can't do this. This is not your hobby. Like, you need to turn this into a career. And so then I started taking on these projects. And honestly, at the time, I didn't know what I was doing, but I was like hustling and I was just like figuring it out on the job. And I think that's what taught me like how to work. And so it was in parallel. And then my entire thesis, everything was about food and film. Like it was just, it kind of took over. It just took over, and that was it. I didn't have to think about it.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you all for being here. Again, follow Afikra on Instagram and the Matbakh podcast on Apple. This will be live. This will be on the podcast series as well, recorded, so you can go back and relive this amazing conversation. And tomorrow, same time, 6 o'clock, we will have another session with Ziad. Thank you. Thank you, Leen.
Thank you. Thank you.